What is a global city? Global cities are places which take advantage of globalization, places which are the real winners of globalization, places which can play a leading role in a globalized world today. They can play a leading role in the globalized world today because they are very populated places. Of course, the global cities are among the largest cities in the world. Not always the most populated because there are a lot of other criteria. Cities like Chongqing or Mexico City, for example, which are among the 5 most populated cities in the world, are not alpha plus cities. But the global cities are always very populated. New York City, for example, has around 20 million inhabitants. London has 10 million inhabitants. Even if among the alpha plus cities, you have cities which have only 5 million inhabitants like Sydney in Australia or 2.5 million like Dubai, it's always more than 1 or 2 million inhabitants. So it's always very large cities. The second quality of the global cities is that they are very wealthy cities. For example, Paris produces 30% of the French GDP, and France is the 6th economic power in the world. So the global cities are places where there is a very active economy, where there are a lot of companies which produce high added value activities. Then, a global city is a concentration of people. They are very populated, but a concentration of people to make the economy grow. Because the people consume, the people are wealthy, they are able to buy a lot of things, so they consume, but at the same time, they work. And people who live in global cities are very skilled, so they work in high added value economic activities. So they make the economy grow by working and by consuming. But a global city is also a place of power. Political power, of course. If you take the example of Washington City, it's obvious in Washington City, which has around 7 million inhabitants, you have all the political powers of the United States. But if you go to New York City, even if New York is not a political capital, in New York City you have the headquarters of the United Nations. So you have international political powers, but you also have economic powers. For example, in New York City, you have the New York Stock Exchange. In London, you have the London Stock Exchange, of course. And the economic power is also the headquarters of big companies, like in San Francisco in the Silicon Valley, most of the GAFA, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, which are based there. In Seattle, you have Boeing, Microsoft. The power can be a cultural power in a city like Paris, for example, which is a city which influences the culture of all the world by creating fashions, by showing what must be an example for the other cultures. The global city is very influential. And of course, you have the best universities, which represent the scientific power. So, a global city is a place of innovation. It is a place where you invent what will influence the world in the future. New York City is a place of cultural innovation. London, too, of course. This is the place where the best artists want to be. But it's also technical innovation. And I think that the best example may be the Silicon Valley near San Francisco. Then, a global city is a leading center because it has power in an interdependent world. Because as the world is interdependent, it is possible to have influence on all the world today. And the global cities are the places which play a leading role in this interdependent world because they have the power, because they invent what will influence all this world in the future. So a global city is also a hub. A hub is a place where the different flows of the world can meet. A place where there are very good transport infrastructures and communication infrastructures in order to have all the flows which cross and which meet. For example, if you want to move from a small city to another small city in the world, you are obliged to take a plane to go to New York City, to Miami, or to London, Paris, because you need to go through a hub. You don't have direct flights. Whereas from the airports of London, for example, you can go wherever you want. So a global city is connected to the rest of the world. It is also connected to its hinterland. Its hinterland is all the area which depends directly on this city. For example, France is the hinterland of Paris because Paris dominates all France. When you are in France, if you want to go on the road, you are often obliged to go through Paris. You go to Paris to take a plane, for example. Paris masters the communication of all France with the rest of the world. A city like New York City, for example, has an influence on a very important hinterland. Not all the United States, but all the megalopolis. And the megalopolis in the northeast of the United States is a very important and rich place. So it's a very important hinterland. Another example can be taken in Germany. Frankfurt is less populated than Berlin. In Frankfurt you have 2 million inhabitants, in Berlin you have 4 million. But Frankfurt has a most powerful hinterland because Frankfurt dominates the Rhineland, which is the center of the European megalopolis, whereas Berlin is more isolated in the east of Germany. Then a global city is also a place which connects an important region, its hinterland, to the rest of the world. If you want to have communication from your region to the rest of the world, you have to go through the global city. So it gives a very important role to the global city. A global city is a kind of gate. We also say a hub. So global cities have a lot of roles. There are consequences. The first consequence is, as a global city is very innovative, and as it is a hub, a crossroads, a place where all the flows of the world meet, it is very attractive. It attracts a lot of investments. Of course, the transnational corporations want to invest in the global cities because it is a place which is connected to the rest of the world, because it is a place where there is innovation. So innovation is always good for business. So global cities attract the investments and the economic activities. The second consequence is the urban sprawl, because as it has a very important hinterland and a lot of connections with this hinterland, and as it is very populated, the global cities grow larger and larger and extend the area on which it lays. The best example here may be Los Angeles. Los Angeles is more than 100 kilometers large. Then the third consequence is what we call metropolization. As a global city is wealthy, so with a lot of economic activities, as it is powerful, as it is attractive, well, there are more and more activities and more population. And then the cities, the metropolises, which are already the most important and the most powerful, become more and more powerful. These are the consequences which can explain the dynamism of the global cities. But there are other consequences. The first one is the inequalities. Because if a global city attracts more and more the population and the activities, it is of course the dynamic, skilled and rich population, but also a lot of people who can come there because they hope to find a better life. For example, in the Chinese cities like Shanghai, like Beijing, there is a very important middle class who lives there because they work in the tertiary activities, they work in the administration of the powerful places, in the upper tertiary activities. But there are also millions of workers who have come from the countryside because they hope to find a job to build the skyscrapers, for example. In cities like Dubai, there is a very important proletariat of very poor people who are exploited to make the city work and to make the rest of the city become richer and richer. So the global cities are the place where you can find the richest people, but also the places where you can find the poorest people. The second consequence is the consequence of the attractivity. As it is more and more attractive, as there are more and more economic activities, the global cities are congested. There are a lot of examples. In all the big cities, you'll waste a lot of time, for example, in the traffic jam. Los Angeles is very famous for it. Los Angeles is a very paradoxical city because it has the largest motorways network and people spend their hours and hours in the traffic jams. The consequence of the urban sprawl is the environmental problems, because if the cities are larger, it needs more infrastructures, and people have to move on longer ways from their house to their job. And then it pollutes a lot, and the traffic jams pollute too. And the global cities are places which are very polluted. Los Angeles is very famous. We call that the smog. The smog, which is at the same time smoke and fog, which makes visibility pretty bad in these cities. Sometimes you don't see the sun because of the smog, and a lot of people get sick because of this pollution. You have very important examples in the Indian or in the Chinese cities. So the global cities are the places which take advantage of globalization. These are the places where you see what globalization produces the best. Global cities are the places where you can see the dynamism provoked and entailed by globalization. But global cities are also the places where you see the most important tensions which result from globalization.